Starfield suffers the same social and consumer habits that followed Cyberpunk until its eventual release. Obviously, the disaster that was Cyberpunk is on a whole nother level, and while the games differ quite a bit, what doesn't is the insurmountable hype that enveloped both of them well before launch. Like a moth to a flame, I stood firm in my belief that Starfield would be everything people were saying it was going to be. A massive sci-fi open-world RPG with choices that affect the story and expansive, meaningful exploration. That it was going to reach new heights and bring the power with it to define this new generation. Well, it doesn't do any of that. In fact, Starfield feels lacking in a lot of areas that previous Bethesda titles have perfected, which I'm gonna get into in this video. But first I want to talk about hype and how it can damage these games. Now, we as consumers can't really fault developers and publishing companies for relying on a tactic that has worked since the dawn of time. The slow drip feed of information and the lack of real hands-on gameplay lets players and fans' imaginations run amok as to what the game could offer, which in turn effectively sells the game itself. Unless you straight up lie about the content in the game, which a lot of developers and publishers actually do that, unfortunately. But based on the information that's published in the small snippets of gameplay and trailers we get, players can catch a glimpse of the game but also interpret this information for themselves and what they would like to see within the game. Now, hype is a funny thing because no matter how good a game is, hype will always have a 1 step forward, 2 steps back aftermath because the hype becomes so strong that people firmly believe that the game is going to be the next best thing since sliced bread. But of course, after the game comes out, there is uproar and disappointment among many people.
Sorry, did you want to get immersed in our world? Yeah, well, guess what? Fucking pronouns!
You serious?
And the people that went in with reasonable expectations or no expectations at all are often either blown away or at least just generally happy. I don't think anyone will argue against that the surge of content creators has a direct correlation to hype culture because the people who actively follow and make content about these games pre-launch will make videos about every little detail.
Fucking hell.
This in turn can obviously build false expectations among their viewers, and this is exactly why I do not go to YouTube for my source of information anymore. Regardless though, the hype still managed to get a hold of me from my friends that really wanted the game, but also the various trailers. And because the hype got a hold of me, I, like so many other eager gamers, threw additional cash at Bethesda to get the game a week early. 1, because I could, but 2, because I wanted to jump in and get my hands on it before everyone else did, because that's a position of power. A position of power that publishers and developers have been preying on for a long time now, and it's clearly working for them. Also, if you're a content creator like myself, you want to get the game as early as possible. And I can tell you that in my first 5 hours with the game, it had my jaw on the floor pretty much the whole time.
Wow.
I'm trying to be reasonable here. Can't believe
I think I'm in love with you.
You can meet as friends?
No.
I couldn't believe that I could walk around in my own spaceship and then blast off into the stars to find adventure. It was a dream come true for someone who loves sci-fi genre as much as I do. However, as the hours passed, the game started to drain me and I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The feeling of emptiness eluded me for a long time, so much so that I decided to boot up Skyrim and Fallout 4 to see what was missing, and this is what I found. Now, past this point is going to be a lot of spoilers, so anyone concerned for their playthrough remaining untainted, now is your time to click off the video. Right off the hop, many review outlets led people to believe that Starfield is Bethesda's best narrative achievement to date. Well, that is purely subjective based on what you want out of your games. The quality in storytelling and subtle world building is not, and it's immediately noticeable as a step down from their previous work. Now let's take a look into why. So Starfield's opening opens with miners Lynn and Heller prepping for their shift as we tag along, clearly a part of this crew. We stand in one spot while a bunch of dialogue is spoken that holds no relevance to the plot or the world.
Most Dusties don't even make it this far. I have a good feeling about you.
We're at group hug now or at the end of the shift?
Lynn gets quite close to her face, clearly Bethesda showcasing their improvements to their 20-year-old engine that they insist on keeping alive, and guess what, Bethesda, the engine still doesn't look that great. There is one consistent theme in this exchange and dialogue, and that's Lynn's insistence on ensuring her crew works safely so that they can go home at the end of the day, showing that she is an empathetic character.
Go steady, go safe, go home with a pocket full of credits at the end of the day.
So we reach the bottom, we follow her, getting to know her a little bit, do a little bit of mining for ourselves to understand how that mechanic works, and then Lynn does a 180 personality-wise, throwing her concerns about safety out the window as she gets abnormal readings from within the mine, sending us, a new miner that she knows nothing about, to retrieve it.
Okay, you're up.
How about new?
This 7-minute intro does a little to capture anyone's attention because the player isn't given anything about this new world. Why do we care about Lynn and Heller as characters, and why do we care about their banter of their choice of career if they have nothing interesting to say? So let's jump back all the way to 2011 with the release of Skyrim. Everyone by this point knows this heavily memed introduction that was literally printed onto pillows, and whoever did this is a fucking genius. If you played Skyrim and you liked it, there's a good chance that you saw this bad boy at least 2 or 3 times. It's a mere 4 minutes from the fade-in of the black to the departure from the horse carriage, and in that time the dialogue and voice acting managed to convey more important pieces of information to the player. You learn about the warring factions, the political views, and most importantly how you ended up in the situation the game starts you off in. These characters talk organically, with the horse thief talking about his despise for the commotion of the rebellion Stormcloak army has caused within Skyrim because the Imperial army is now everywhere.
Damn you Stormcloaks. Skyrim was fine until you came along. Empire was nice and lazy.
This is of course him insinuating that before the war he would have gotten away with his crimes. It's not just the who, the what, the when, where, and why either. There is added depth in that these doomed prisoners of war also lament and reminisce on their birthplaces and even call upon their gods to save them.
Rorikstead. I'm from Rorikstead.
Keep in mind that these birthplaces that they mention are actual locations in the game world that you can later explore.
Holy smokes.
This helps you feel interwoven and connected to a fictional place that seems grounded before you even step 1 foot onto its soil. Similarly, Fallout 4 follows suit, but unlike Skyrim's cold, depressing opening, Fallout 4 treats its opening like an everyday for the protagonists and their family residing in their Boston home, stylized by its retrofuturism. It showcases the game's main themes of unconditional love and the bond of family, setting the narrative up with a strong intro. This opening is first played before the bombs drop, allowing the players to first see the world and what it was like before the apocalypse and the devastation that would follow as you stumble upon it years later. Fallout 4 has a rather long introduction, centering around a slow build-up to the inevitable. It's here that the game establishes your character as a military vet or a lawyer and a father or a mother depending on your role. Through details scattered around the house, you can gain even more insight into the world by simply looking instead of exposition clouding these moments, which helps the sense of realism as these characters go about their day in a natural way. Though you just started playing, this house feels like a home because everything inside is unfolding organically like it would in a typical suburban neighborhood. It's once you get into the cryopods that your objective becomes clear when your spouse is shot while your son is taken. It's a drastic turn of events as you watch helplessly only to be awoken sometime later to look upon this new world built off of devastation. So now we return to Starfield in 2023, and what happens in the opening? Well, your hands meet a foreign object, you have a vision of some kind which knocks you out cold. When you come to, you're told someone is coming for the artifact, and it's here that you are finally told one thing about your character, and that is that you're a recruit from Argos Extractors hired by Lynn.
You know who you are? New recruit for Argos Extractors? Ring any bells?
The client Lynn speaks of is of course Barrett from the main faction Constellation. Pirates show up, Barrett gets involved with them, and then he gives you a ship to head to Constellation because of that one vision that you've seen.
How about I stay and I send your Dusty here in my place? I know, but she's not some minor anymore, Lynn.
And you can't even refuse to do this, you have to follow this quest. There is next to no world building, and this plot is forced upon the player in an inorganic way with little incentive to do it. Skyrim opens up the world and asks you to find your own way. Fallout 4 has a direct objective which for better or worse forces plot urgency, but once the vault opens, the world is yours to journey off into, and as Todd said,
That mountain is not just a backdrop. You can walk all the way to the top of that mountain.
Whereas Starfield has tiny maps that require fast travel, so you feel a lot more confined in your endeavors. I don't think anyone who is a fan of Bethesda's work would disagree with the sentiment that the studio isn't known for their intricate, thought-provoking plot lines, in-depth player choice, or jaw-dropping twists that have you standing in front of a mirror asking yourself what the fuck just happened, like I did when Joel died in The Last of Us Part 2. Those accolades are best left to studios that prioritize those aspects and excel in that area. While Bethesda has had incredible quests and pieces of content in their games, perhaps their strongest ingredient is one that actively works against the enjoyment of the rest of the meal that is this starfaring adventure. It's feasible that I am a mere product of my time, but I grew up playing Skyrim. Maybe playing is an understatement. Skyrim became my life for 2 straight years after its release, and honestly, I didn't know why at the time. Something about that game was just so enthralling that the thought of putting the controller down and moving on to other games never really arose. Some years later, Fallout 4 would release, and it's here that I again was entranced in its gameplay loop, but this time something changed. I understood why, which makes the lack of it in Starfield incredibly jarring. I amassed hundreds of hours in the games prior, not because of their sprawling storylines and choices. No, it was the organic exploration of a cohesive world. Bethesda intentionally creates their games with an open-ended approach, allowing players to have total freedom in how they go about the world, effectively making their own story with their own character. In fact, Fallout 4's narrative was so panned because it forced urgency into the plot, so people felt like they had to complete it when all they really wanted to do was go exploring and find what lied off the beaten path. It's here that the true heart and soul of their adventures thrive. Your character can truly become who you want them to be without any narrative constraints. Skyrim is exactly the same way, with many gamers not even touching the main story until the late game because seamlessly exploring the wide expanse of land was incredibly alluring, and rewards were aplenty for doing so. They simply walked one way, found quests, loot, and interesting locations through traversing the enriched world. There would always be some point of interest you were making your way to, but each trek across the dangerous war-torn land would be derailed because there was no shortage of new sites, enemies, and locations which housed rich environmental storytelling even when there was nothing actively happening. No 2 locations would be the same because these locations were all handcrafted, and it's because of this that going into yet another cave never got old, simply due to the fact that you never knew what you were going to find. Exploration in gaming is an element that Bethesda might as well have defined on their own, because their games have had an unmatched level of interactivity.
My mind was just somewhere else. Do you need a room? Drink?
Random encounters and places to see that has something of intrinsic value to the player, whether it's loot, quests, or simple world building. And then there's Starfield, a product of the next-gen era that has shockingly broken the cycle that gives these titles the personality and satisfaction that they ooze, even if it is more polished. Bethesda took a big risk developing a game with this immeasurable scope. Housing 1,000 planets and dozens of galaxies to explore is no small feat. It's an incredibly ambitious project, one that required the studio to make use of everyone's favorite plaything now, AI, and that helped them build out the planets and make each one traversable. The game would be enormous in storage size without it, and crafting each planet would take a decade. It would take forever. While it works in terms of the scope of the game, it hinders the natural exploration. Procedural generation in itself isn't inherently bad. There are plenty of games that use it effectively for their purposes. Minecraft, No Man's Sky, and Deep Rock Galactic have procedural generation that is used to provide a different experience in the play spaces every time, but these aforementioned titles also don't put a heavy emphasis on written quests, storylines, and world building, but instead exploration, or in the case of Deep Rock Galactic, combat. Procedural generation was used in the creation of Skyrim's map based on certain seeds that the developers wanted, but they used it as a basis to later go in and handcraft every inch of the map. Starfield's procedural generation is entirely random every time you go somewhere because it wasn't used as a template, but rather a way of forming the game world with points of interest and landscapes that would keep players engaged when landing on one of the 1,000 planets. However, many of the game's locations are devoid of small details, environmental storytelling, quests, and interesting sights to see. There is a one-off line in Skyrim's opening as you're passing by the inn where the Stormcloak remarks on if a girl he knows from Helgen still makes the mead he likes with juniper berries.
This is Helgen. I used to be sweet on a girl from here. Wonder if Elod is still making that mead with juniper berries mixed in.
No one in their right mind would think from this one line that this very beverage can be found in the burnt down inn if you return to Helgen.
I fucking love it!
This is the type of detail and world building Bethesda is known for. So what the hell happened here? Ultimately, what you will find in many of Starfield's locations are randomly generated points of interest that quite frequently mirror the same locations you just saw. These points of interest are always situated far enough from the landing point to become a bother when walking across the game's many planets.
3 hours later.
Yay, another pointless landmark. And because there's no rover or vehicles to help you with this traversal, you soon realize that none of these planets or locations are worth exploring because you won't really find anything remotely interesting on them. The problem with this is that the game has a pool of 30 points of interest that will be randomly selected each time you make landfall. Let's say on average there are 5 of these locations every time you land. That means there is a high probability that the player will be hit with the same looking locations over and over. I know this because I've seen it. I've seen the same spacer base 8 times in the same bioluminescent cave with dead miners laying in scripted areas. It's not only that these locations look the same, but the loot and clutter will be the same as well. I knew exactly where to look for credits every time I ran into this spacer base. The lively and detailed sections are all saved for the game's hubs and cities that were handcrafted by the team, and that becomes blatantly obvious. Though they are handcrafted, they lack a sense of a simulation of life because shops don't close at night and most named NPCs don't walk around the game world interacting with others like this.
The Legion taught us loyalty, and we're loyal to Dawnstar.
This isn't over. I catch you sending one letter to General Tullius. I'll have you both executed.
It's completely jarring jumping to and from these areas because at times it seems like these planets were cut content not even meant to be in the game. That's how little interest they have generated in me. Sure, it's cool to land on a funny looking planet and see what weird alien life it has, but after looking around for a couple of minutes, it's on to the next one. This was no doubt intentional to mimic the vastness and emptiness of space, but there is no incentive to actually land on any of these planets, so they might as well not even be here at all. Why not just have one solar system with a couple of uncharted planets to explore? That would have afforded developers time to handcraft all of these locations. Mass Effect did this years ago and excelled in having a universe that felt truly alive without having to land on a planet to mine for resources. Also, Mass Effect had aliens and a strong sense of immersion, which Starfield doesn't. Speaking of immersion, it's practically synonymous with the infamous developer because despite their tendency to release games with prolific bugs,
hey, you. Finally awake.
Stiff animations and otherwise outdated mechanics, their game worlds of the past managed to capture the attention of millions. Fallout 4's Boston and Skyrim's Nordic Tundra captivated many by making you feel less like an observer and more of an occupant. It felt like you belonged in a digital world that would continue long after you shut it off. Honestly, it's a lot like Red Dead Redemption 2 in this regard. This is bolstered by the fact that these landscapes and the respective landmarks all had something interesting to say, oftentimes referencing the game world in a context that would make sense to that setting, while also giving information to the player. Now, I'm not saying that Starfield doesn't do this because there were plenty of times where I would be walking around and an NPC would make a one-off comment in passing that would give me a quest. But as I mentioned before about the world, it's a lot more confined and honestly a lot less interesting. In Skyrim, the player could take this information they were just given, make a visual goal on the map, and then trek into the unknown, ironically knowing that they would stumble upon something that would be inevitably a lot more interesting than the quest that they were actively chasing. You never knew what lied within your path of adventure. A man might be hunting with his dog, maybe members of the common rabble are deep in the wilderness partaking in the breakfast of champions, only to then offer you one out of generosity, although that item doesn't actually have any value to you other than to make this place feel authentic.
Ah, but you look tired. Come, share a bottle of Honningbrew mead with me.
For sanity's sake, it made undertaking even the most uninteresting quests of the typical talk to me, walk 800 miles to find it and then come back and talk to me again quests worth accepting, because each expedition into the world would lead you to something else. Much to my dissatisfaction, Starfield carves its own path with how the player interacts and goes about its open world, quote unquote, in a contrived manner. Let me ask you a few questions. If I told you that a game was built around fast travel being a foundation of how the player traverses these play spaces in a consistent manner, would that worry you? What if an open world RPG heavily relied on menus and UIs to the point that a substantial amount of time was spent within these menus instead of actually playing the game? Would that worry you? Well, Starfield leans into both of these categories to an uncomfortable degree. Now, the typical criticism for using fast travel in games, especially open world games, is if you need to rely on it to get around the world, the game isn't respecting your time by failing to offer anything of value. That, or you're just one of the unlucky ones too busy with their life to actually spend time roaming around a digital world. I can't quite say I've ever played an open world title that requires fast travel as frequently as Starfield does, or that the game requires you to play it by tediously not playing the game surfing through menus. That's not even including the fact that the menu navigation is terrible. What I'm saying sounds a bit exaggerated, but I can assure you it's really not. To tie this in, it gives you a lot less incentive to do menial quests like that in Starfield, because it simply isn't worth going into the menus, fast traveling to another planet only to be given a lackluster reward, which more often than not turns out to be credits or ship parts if you help someone in space. I miss the days when menial quests would reward you with some of the best loot just because. I spent enough time in Skyrim looting money, and I never really needed it from NPCs, so it was nice to get physical rewards every so often. Whereas Starfield's economy and fundamental gameplay elements revolve around the procurement of money or credits, because of how the game was built. Why would I do this deck collection quest where I get 5,000 credits when I can just do a better written faction or main quest to get triple that permission and rewards that make them worth doing? It's apparent that Bethesda was focused on its scope rather than putting in the time to nail aspects they have been doing well for the better part of a decade. Todd himself stated that the game wasn't even fun until like the last year of development, and honestly, a lot of the time it's pretty apparent. Despite my seemingly endless grievances with most of the game's building blocks, it doesn't falter in every area. The game's abundance of factions and their subsequent quest lines are where Starfield gains its slick momentum. Its wide array of independent narratives offers some of the best storytelling and mission structure found within this world, all of which delve deep into themes like corporate espionage, crime, and biological warfare that may or may not derive from a highly acclaimed piece of fiction. What am I saying? Of course it does.
Part of a livestock tracking system. Should let you keep tabs on how close the Terramorph is.
The Crimson Fleet is a particular standout to me, having to go undercover within their ranks. In doing so, you learn about their way of life, and if that's something that suits you, which I don't know why it would because they're pretty terrible characters.
Alright, here is the plan, so shut up and listen.
The player can opt to betray their handlers by going rogue and helping the Crimson Fleet find their long-lost legacy and fortune. A quest, by the way, that took me about 5 hours to get through, and in that time I got entangled into an affair aboard a luxury cruise liner, acquired a prototype ship by infiltrating a highly fortified space station, and boarded a long-lost ship drifting in an electromagnetic storm. The ensuing space battle as the quest finale is also really excellent. The factions put the game's many systems at the forefront, and much like Skyrim, there is a faction for everybody. If you main Stealth, Ryusian Industries is the place for you. The Freestar Collective offers a detective story, while the UC Vanguard takes the typical alien threat trope and runs with it, and that was probably my favorite one. All of these in some way, shape, or form make use of Bethesda's improved combat, ship combat, new persuasion system, and of course, stealth. Between the four factions and their quest lines, you were easily looking at around 20 hours of content outside of the main story alone. My main gripe with these stories, and yeah, you saw this coming, it was going to get into more bad. It's the lack of any real meaningful choices that have actual repercussions within the world. Now, I know Skyrim and Fallout 4 follow this in that their choices remain mostly inconsequential to how the world around them reacts outside of a few lines of dialogue here or there, which I get, but there are strange instances of choice being teased when in fact there is never a choice at all because of the outcome of that particular thread already has a predetermined outcome outside of your actions. The perfect example of this lies within the recruitment mission for the Crimson Fleet. The leader of this rough and tumble pirate legion requests that you accompany him to a planet that could hold valuable information to a long-lost rumor of the fleet's old leader that apparently secured millions of dollars aboard a ship before it went missing. A certain pirate by the name of Mathis joins us as well. While searching the complex, you get separated from Delgado, the leader, and it's here that Mathis tries to induct you into his master plan to kill Delgado and take his place at the head of the fleet.
We used this opportunity to take out Delgado, and at the same time, make some serious credits for ourselves.
That's a pretty interesting proposal on the first mission, and one that immediately had me wondering how it would pan out, as I intended to just sell him out to Delgado in the moment we met back up with him. But this doesn't happen. In fact, there is absolutely no dialogue option that allows you to rat out Matthias, which in the context of the story made no sense because you're an active undercover mole, so ratting Matthias out would help build rapport with your new allies. During the Freestar Collective quest, the player is tasked with linking members of an old war battalion to a conspiracy to drive farmers from their land. This investigation eventually leads you to an ex-military vet, Maya Cruz. You first go to find her on an intensive medical care station called the Clinic. Even though you are a Freestar deputy, you have to find a way to sneak into the VIP area to talk with her, only to find that everybody is dead and Maya Cruz is gone. That seemed pretty bad, so rationally, I went to talk to the administrator of the station or the law enforcement there to let them know that there was a literal murder down the hall. But there was no way to warn them that part of their space station was doused in contaminants. While we're on the topic of the Freestar Collective quest line, the end result and the choice has no effect at all. The conspiracy lands on the guy who prompted the investigation in the first place, a guy by the name of Ron Hope, a man responsible for the prospering nature of his town. It's said several times that without Ron Hope, the people of Hopetown would be doomed.
Do you really want to put all these people out of work and make their families suffer?
But if you choose to kill him, absolutely nothing changes. The plant will still be there, and so will the people. It wouldn't even have been that hard to show some semblance of your actions having consequences. Have Hopetown become a ghost town from the time you leave until you come back. Have an option to straight up rat Matthias out, then see his body strung up in their base every time you go in because they're making an example out of him. I honestly don't think I'm asking for much here, and I know a lot of people feel the same way. It does little to convince me to return to New Game Plus because there aren't enough deviations in choices or gameplay mechanics. In a recent interview, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Todd Howard, made a statement regarding Starfield and how it was designed to facilitate a player base that would last for the foreseeable future. 5 years to be exact, that's how long the team plans to support it. Can't see that being the reality, but we'll see. Even before uncovering this information, the emphasis on repeat runs was blatantly obvious for anyone that saw the main quest to completion because there is no real conclusion. If there's one cliche Bethesda is known for, it's their all-powerful 1 in a million protagonists that are the only one capable or able to undertake a task at hand because they were the chosen one for a purpose outside of anyone's understanding, blah 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 blah. Skyrim does it with its Dragonborn story. On the contrary, Fallout 4 doesn't bestow an unnatural power upon the player per se, but it tasks you with going up against insurmountable odds for the sake of family, helped by the fact that the leader of the Institute literally sets you up for success because of their relation to their leader. Starfield definitely plays directly off of this trope, with the character being the only one that can uncover the meaning and purpose of strange alien artifacts despite a whole group of people working to understand them before you even join them. These artifacts bestow a vision upon organic life when they are pulled from embedded rocks. It just so happens that the same thing happens to you, which sets you on the path with Constellation. However, to no one's surprise, not even mine, you're the only one able to have seen multiple visions. Members of Constellation are entranced by finding these pieces to a puzzle because they believe it holds secrets or at least some kind of divine power. These visions in their entirety don't really elicit any information to the player about what it could possibly be. It's only once the Starborn faction shows up to prevent you from finding more pieces that becomes a little bit interesting. The Starborn and their ships are visually striking, and I was honestly really intrigued by them, but that's until you're hit with the fucking twist that they're just Constellation members from another galaxy that were reborn when they enter the Unity, a multiverse that opens once the artifact is complete, allowing the player to be reborn from a star, hence the name Starborn.
Not a real relatively expendable Dusty anymore, are you? Look at where you've ended up.
That's it. I've had it with this dump!
You come to the realization that the main quest and its conclusion are literally simply a vessel to get you to enter the Unity and restart the game in New Game Plus, where the outcome of quests and the game structure remain mostly the same outside of a few deviations to the roles of NPCs, and you get more dialogue options that don't present new outcomes at all. These changes are not derivative of the player's actions and choices in their previous run though, so it's just not impactful. When you take into consideration how little the choices affect the end result of the quests and the combat doesn't have much variation, you wonder if their emphasis on New Game Plus was justified at all. It makes sense in a game like The Witcher 3, where quests and their choices carry consequences and changes which carry forward that not only affect the characters around you, but also impact the world in some really shocking ways. Kirametsu's questline is of a secondary nature, yet what you choose within these missions can affect the outcome of her fate, and if she dies, she's gone forever. Now, I know that these games are different in that regard, but my point is that branching nature warrants repeat playthroughs, while Starfield doesn't, because you can see everything the game has to offer in one save file. To make matters worse, the combat will always boil down to shooting people with guns. Skyrim's combat, while floaty and outdated for its time, had a multitude of ways to go about it, tackling its many encounters. There were so many deviations from the sword combat alone, one-handed, two-handed, and even a one-handed weapon with a shield. All of these played slightly differently, while others could focus on a stealth build, allowing them to sneak through shadows, roll, use daggers to strike their enemies from the back. If you felt like being someone who deals damage from afar, the classic bow and arrow setup and its respective abilities were a lot of fun and my personal go-to. And then there was the wide expanse of magic that could be cast from both hands. There were a staggering amount of spells to learn that included something as simple as healing to more sinister applications like necromancy to summon the dead around you to fight on your behalf. Not to mention, Skyrim had a lot of awesome looking cinematic takedown animations. So while Skyrim's lack of real choices somewhat aligns with Starfield, this wide range of player freedom in how the player built their character is what kept many people coming back to it. Even picking your race at the start of the game would affect how the world interacted with you in small inconsequential ways. If you chose an orc per se, you would be welcomed into one of the many orc strongholds scattered around the map. But if you stumble upon these as any other race, there would be a quest requiring you to gain access to it. Dark elves, or elves in general, are somewhat under the oppression of racism throughout many of the strongholds of Skyrim, and while it never hindered the player's progress, NPCs in certain cities would make racist remarks towards you, lumping you in with the oppression as well.
They're parasites. What do you think you're doing?
Fallout 4's gameplay loop and how it uses guns around its combat can be lumped in with Starfield, and that a lot of the game boils down to just shooting things, sneaking, or talking your way out of a situation. Where Fallout 4 differs though is VATS, an in-game slow motion targeting system that allows you some strategic advantages in combat as you pick your targets, choose their respective limbs to deal the most damage to, and activate it to watch satisfying animations play out while a raider's head gracefully departs its meat mech. It added personality and circumvented the gameplay from grinding to a repetitive halt. Yet the inducement to visit Fallout 4's post-apocalyptic surface a second time lie within the 4 unique factions that all had their own branching storylines regarding the conclusion of the main Institute narrative. They were all distinct in their morals, values, loot, and missions. And because these 4 factions all played a direct role in the main story, choosing one and completing enough of their missions would align you with them going forward, essentially locking you out of content. It wouldn't just be that you couldn't do their missions anymore, factions have a role in the story even if you aren't their ally. For instance, siding with the militarized Brotherhood of Steel sees you wiping out the Railroad. On the contrary, if you side with the Railroad, you attack the Brotherhood. It gives you the freedom of choice, and those choices come with consequences by locking you out of content, so if you want to see everything, you naturally have to replay it. If you want to experience just about everything in one run in Starfield, like I said, you can definitely do that. There is only one main faction that ties into its overarching story, meaning that there are no options for taking sides. The 4 secondary factions have no reference or pull regarding the multiverse. That's why I can join the Space Pirates, betray my handlers, kill hundreds of innocent people, and then turn around, join the very people I just made an enemy of because of the excuse of they don't look into people's backgrounds.
A person can draw a lot of conclusions from an outcome like that. You being one of the few who walked away from that battle. But in the Vanguard, we're serious about our take-all-comers policy, regardless of their past. Hell, if we turn down every former pirate...
Are you fucking dumb?
NPCs in faction quests will remark on your past discretions, but none of them see it as a red flag, and honestly, it's completely immersion breaking. If Bethesda's intentions were to entice people to keep playing the game over and over, why didn't they consider logging faction quest lines so that people returning would have more to chase than upgrading powers, which really at the end of the day just facilitates a grind? Sure, there is a lot of depth in the shipbuilder, and that's literally good enough to be its own game, and the outpost management centered around the steady procurement of resources to research and craft with, but none of this is strong enough to carry the game into New Game Plus. Slapping a ship together allows you to spread your creativity, and it allows you to make something that is personal and unique to you, making it something that no one else has, and I believe that is something we need more of in games. Not fucking calling cards and armor sets that everyone can unlock, but pieces of content that you yourself can create with your own ingenuity. It doesn't stop there either. After it's built, you can walk around in it and fucking fly the thing. I mean, how cool is that? It's just how they are utilized for gameplay that is disappointing to me. A lot of the time they just honestly boil down to highly customizable fast travel and storage options. When the combat hits, it's really fun, but trying to find enemies in space is grueling. I mean, I made it a point to fast travel and fly around in systems hoping ships would be there to fight, but I'd say maybe 1 in every 10 systems had 2 ships to kill. The game affords you the ability to become a freelance bounty hunter by accepting contracts in terminals, and I saw that you can install a brig, so naturally I figured if you can install a brig into your ship, you can bring bounties in dead or alive for a difference in reward, but no, you can't. It's merely a cosmetic option. That's it. Boarding enemy ships is a cool mechanic that is awesome for the first 3 times you do it, but then you realize that you have to watch an animation of the docking procedure, and then you have to go into a loading screen to kill 2 people and score lackluster loot. I mean, why can't pirates board my ship, making me drive them off before they can steal my precious cargo? That would have been such a cool, natural encounter. It just seems like the shipbuilder was such a huge part of the development process, and a lot of it feels unfulfilling at launch. I'm not even gonna actually get into the regression and outpost building that somehow makes Fallout 4 seem revolutionary. It's honestly not fun. The last thing I'll touch on, because I know this video by this point is getting really long, but it's the lore. Its lore surrounding the colony war that was laid to rest by an armistice paints a gripping picture of a story that could have been. Throughout the game, various quests will have you visit landmarks and previous battlefields left behind from the war that all look so awesome. Seeing the towering mechs, war-torn surfaces, and bleak color palette gave me a taste of what could have been, what I wanted. I mean, does piloting a mech while aliens scatter the battlefield not sound way better than collect X, Y, Z and then do it again? What were they thinking? Imagine having to choose between the space yeehars and the colonial marines and decide the fate of the war by having to juggle the moral and ethical intricacies of war and the unsanctioned practices like xeno-warfare. It feels like such a big wasted opportunity. Oh, and also, side note, but Fallout 4's NPCs animations are better. I don't know how that's possible, but just watch this comparison. They're just better.
Everyone who's anyone in the Commonwealth is from here, settled here, got kicked out of here. A big wall, some power, working plumbing, schools, and some security goons are what make Diamond City the big monster it is. Oh, love it or hate it.
I appreciate that. It's going to be hard to get some sleep tonight after all this. But the fact that I'm doing something about it might be enough to help.
Okay, now I'm done. It's time to wrap this up. So, Starfield is a massive game that has a lot going for it. Its strongest aspects are found within its sheer amount of customization, faction quests, and the improved gunplay. I can see why people are enjoying it as much as they are. There are plenty of ships to build, outposts to manage, quests to complete, skill trees to upgrade, apartments to furnish, and interesting characters to meet. I put about 75 hours into my first run because I wanted to do everything I could before making this video, and 75 hours is a lot of playtime. Honestly though, after the first 20 to 25 hours, the game really struggled to keep my attention off and on. I had pretty much felt by then that I had seen everything the game had to offer, and the heavy emphasis on resource collection and micromanagement did not do it for me. It was made so simple in Fallout 4, just grab tons of junk and load it into your workbenches, but it's just made so complicated here for reasons I can't explain. Regardless of what people are saying and the massive uproar of hype around this game, it is nowhere near their best achievement to date. In terms of pure scope, sure, but it forgoes some of the heart and soul that made their other games classics that will outlast us all. If you find intrinsic value in seamlessly exploring worlds rooted in rich lore, replay value, and pure immersion, this is likely gonna disappoint you like it did me. I did have fun with it, and it's 100% a good game. I don't want that to be understated by how negative this video has been, and I hope honestly it's not even that negative. I just wanted to make an informative video showing the stance I believe, and that is that Starfield does not reach the standards Bethesda have set for themselves with their questionable quest choices, making it a game that I am indifferent about jumping back into. So that's it. If you liked this video or thought I at least made some good points, I'd appreciate any kind of support, whether it's a like, a sub, or a comment. I know you guys don't really care, but this video and these like long form videos take a fucking long ass time to make. And personally, I'd like to make more long form content like this, so if you made it this far and you liked it, let me know, and peace out.